Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another video. This one's going to be about Unit 8, Section 8, the rise of Nazi Germany. And what we're going to do is we're going to divide this up into two separate videos. This video is going to be about the origins of the National Socialist Party and how their first failed attempt at taking power. And then in the next video, what we're going to see is the rise of Adolf Hitler as the Chancellor of Germany and how he ultimately takes power to lead us then into the next unit, which is Unit 9, World War II. So what we're going to start with here is, of course, the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was, of course, created at the end of the First World War by Max of Baden, who overthrew the Kaiser and created a new democratic system of government in Germany because he thought that was going to help the Germans get a better negotiating position and a better deal in the Treaty of Versailles. Of course, we already now know that that didn't really work out so well because the Treaty of Versailles was imposed on Germany. Germany lost territory. Germany was severely limited by the Treaty of Versailles in terms of their military. They had huge reparations payments to the Allies. And of course, Germans themselves referred to this particular consequence as the stab in the back, right? They looked at World War I and they said, we were ultimately winning that war, and then we got stabbed in the back by Prince Max of Baden, and now we're in a position where we don't really trust our government. We don't really like the government. The Treaty of Versailles is absolutely crippling Germany itself, and there's going to be all of these negative consequences for it. So under the new Weimar Republic, one of the first things that they have to deal with, of course, is because of the reparations payments and because their economy generally wasn't doing so well, they hit a period of hyperinflation. And this period of hyperinflation came about as a result of Germany printing money. So there were paper marks and there were gold marks. And the paper marks ultimately could change in value by how much money the government printed, whereas the gold marks held their value. And so what this particular chart that we're looking at here shows us is the comparison between one gold mark and one paper mark. So if you go back to 1918, you can see that it's about 1 to 1. Pretty close, right? One gold mark would get you, and then if you go over to the right-hand side, about one paper mark would get you about one gold mark. That's reasonably close to what it would have been right at the end of World War I. But as you can see, over time, the number of paper marks it would take you to get one gold mark continues to go up. And this is what we call a logarithmic scale, which means it doesn't go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It goes up 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. So by the time we get to the end of 1923, it takes you 1 trillion paper marks to get one gold mark. And essentially the money loses all of its value, which means that people who are getting paid salaries, they lose, their income, they can't afford anything anymore. Germany is falling apart and nothing really helps in this particular way, right? And I showed you guys this one when we were talking about the Great Depression, right? Germans start burning money. Kids are playing with huge stacks of currency out front of their houses because it doesn't matter if somebody steals it. France then decides that they're going to occupy what's called the Ruhr River Valley, which is a major industrial center in Germany, which again further upsets German nationalists, and it upsets the German economy, and just everything is going crazy in 1923. And it looks like, oh my goodness, there's going to be a collapse. Now, a lot of people started to worry because they said, well, in an economic decline, one of the big problems is this is when communists start to get a lot of power, and this is when communism starts to sound very appealing. So people were worried about a communist revolution happening in Germany as a result of this economic collapse. In 1924, then, the United States stepped in with what was called the Dawes Plan. It's actually two different plans, the Dawes Plan and the Young Plan, but we're going to specifically refer to it just as the Dawes Plan. The way this plan worked, the United States provided Germany directly $2.5 billion worth of loans. That was supposed to help them to float their economy, pay for their economy, pay for their reparations, pay for everything else that Germany had to do. In exchange, then, Germany was going to pay $2 billion of that to the Allies that they owed war reparations to. So again, a lot of this money is going to go to France. $2 billion of that $2.5 billion is going to go to the Allies, which means Germany's getting $500 million a year to help them stay stable and stay afloat and keep their economy working. $2 billion goes to the Allies so that the Allies are getting their war reparations payments, which means they don't have to continue to occupy the Ruhr River Valley, and Germany gets to continue to be its own separate country again. The flip side of that then is that the Allied powers like France have to pay $2.6 billion in war debt payments to the United States for what they owed the United States that we lent them during the course of the war. So in the end, it's actually a pretty good deal for everybody because the United States makes $100 million. Germany gets to remain stable, even though they're still under the Treaty of Versailles. The Allies get their war reparations payments, and the Allies end up paying the United States back. So things do at least stabilize a little bit there in 1924, and Germany doesn't go full-on into collapse. However, a consequence of all of this economic turmoil is there was a group of men in the city of Munich, or in German it's München, but in English we would say Munich. In Munich, they started a new political party which was called the National Socialists Democratic Workers' Party, the NSDAP, or the National Socialist Party, or of course what most people started to refer to them as later, which was Nazis, which is just an abbreviation of National Socialist Party. These guys essentially put together a German workers' party that ultimately looked at nationalizing industry, so they wanted the government to be in charge of running the economy. Pan-Germanism, which is this idea that says that ultimately all Germans should live together in the same country and should be unified together, right? So that's what the old idea that we called Großdeutschland before. And of course, the other two components of the plan that they put together is they're absolutely anti-Versailles, the Treaty of Versailles, and also they are anti-Semitic. They blame a lot of the problems in not only the world, but also in Germany on Jewish people. And they say that Jewish people will never really be Germans, and so ultimately we can't trust them. Now, one of the things that they do is they create an organization which is called the Sturmabteilung, or in English, it would be the Stormtroopers. A lot of these guys are World War I veterans. A lot of these guys had a really hard time coming home from the war to an economy that's collapsed, couldn't find a job, couldn't do a whole lot of stuff. And so the Sturmabteilung essentially becomes a veterans organization to help these guys find work and find a place to live and to make sure they have enough food. And so you see that it's very similar to what we saw in Italy with the Squadristi. And these guys really start to use this Sturmabteilung to defend members' businesses and to also attack communists, because one of the big things about the National Socialist Party was they hated communism. They thought that communism was an international Jewish conspiracy. So they started off as a very small group inside of the city of Munich, and eventually the city of Munich, the government of Munich, started to get really kind of interested in what was going on at these guys' meetings. And so they hired a person to go to the meetings to document and to write down and to report back to the government exactly what was going on there, just to make sure that these guys weren't, terrorists plotting some kind of horrible, awful event. So the government of Munich hires a person to go and spy on the National Socialists, to spy on the Nazis. The spy ends up going to the meetings, and he actually decides that he kind of likes their ideas and he would actually really genuinely like to be a member of the organization. And it turns out that for the leaders of the Nazi Party, this guy turns out to be a relatively good organizer too. He's really good at spotting people's strengths and to put them in positions where they can be really successful. And of course, as most of you are probably already guessing, the spy who was originally hired to go and spy on the Nazi Party was Adolf Hitler. He's a World War I veteran. He's a true believer in anti-Semitism. During the war, of course, he had been a courier. He had been injured several times. He went through really horrible, awful treatments to try to get him back to health after the war. When he survived a poison gas attack, he actually had a condition called hysterical blindness, which means that his eyes were fine, his body was fine, his brain just absolutely refused to see. And so he went through about 1.5 years of electric shock therapy, and it was really, really, really hard on him to recover from this. After the war, he went to the city of Vienna in his home country of Austria, and he applied to art school. Now, Hitler was a painter. He's not a bad painter. This is some of the work that he did while he was in Vienna. It's kind of like, you should think about this like as postcard material, right? He's making postcards. He's selling them on the street. He applies to go to art school at this art school in Vienna, but the art school in Vienna is like the absolutely premier art program in Europe. And so they don't just take good people, they take the best of the best of the best. And while Hitler's not bad, he's not good enough to get into art school. But this is also what the Nazis used to convince him that, by the way, you know who's in charge of all of those art school admissions, and it's Jewish people, and they're trying to hold you down. And so Hitler really believes that. Hitler really becomes a true believer in Nazism. And then eventually, of course, he starts to take more and more leadership positions. So he takes control of the SA, he starts organizing the Nazi party together, and really developing it into something that is very largely appealing to many, many people inside of Germany. He's telling German people that, you know, it's okay to be German, and Germans are good, and you're being held back by these other people, and it's not your fault. And that's a very appealing message to Germans at the time, to the point where the SA, the Sturmabteilung, really starts to become a majorly powerful force. And the good part about it from the point of view of Germans is the SA isn't regulated by the Treaty of Versailles, so they can have as many people in it as they want. The SA, of course, becomes a major source of power for not only Hitler, but also for the Nazi Party. So much so that in 1923, when things really get bad, Hitler decides that he's going to use his SA and his political party, the Nazi Party, to take control and overthrow the government of Munich in what is called the Munich Beer Hall Putsch, or the Munich Beer Hall overthrow of the government. So he and the Nazis get together, and they march right up to the front door of City Hall, and they're pretty sure that no one's going to stop them, but ultimately it turns out that they're wrong. The police actually do open fire into the crowd of Nazis. Several people are killed, and Hitler then is ultimately arrested. Now, when he goes to his trial, the judge might not have been a member of the Nazi Party, but he was definitely a sympathizer with the Nazi movement. And so what he gives Hitler is he is convicted, but he sentences him to prison in a castle with a private secretary, where Hitler's going to be kind of out of the way, but definitely he's not going to kind of, prison where he's going to be punished or anything. While Hitler's in prison, he writes a book which is called Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. And basically it lays out Hitler's vision of the future, and a lot of it really does, point to what he intends to do in terms of rallying Germany behind one singular leader, in terms of, kicking people out of their homeland and expanding the size of Germany to include all Germans, and having the government direct economic production, and it really is a pretty good roadmap for what he intends to do in the future. Now, while he is in jail, couple of things happen. Number one, the Dawes Plan is renegotiated so that the terms of the Treaty of Versailles don't collapse Germany. France gives up the Ruhr River Valley in 1925, and so ultimately things stabilize and things get better. And despite the fact that Hitler had been really popular before this, when stability comes back to Germany, there's no reason to look for big, huge, crazy, radical changes, and so the Nazi Party starts to lose its appeal to people. Now this takes us then up to 1925, and in 1925 something really, really important for Germany happened, which was this guy, whose name is Paul von Hindenburg, won the election to be the president of Germany. And because he was a great hero in World War I, a lot of people supported that and said, okay, at least we're not going to try to overthrow the government. In October of 1923, the Locarno agreements helped to stabilize the border between France and Germany, and France left the Ruhr River Valley. In 1928, the great powers of the world signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact that we mentioned before, where they gave up the ability to use war ever again. And so even though German people really didn't like their government, it at least stabilized things, and the Nazis didn't really become people that anyone looked to for guidance and for leadership all the way up through the end of the 1920s. But, of course, everybody hopefully should know what's coming here. In 1929, we're going to find the Great Depression, and the Great Depression is the thing that slingshots the Nazi Party into not only importance again, but also into dictatorship and dominance of the German Weimar Republic. So that's where we're going to leave it for this particular video. I'm going to do a follow-up video to this, which is going to look at Hitler comes out of prison, the Great Depression hits, people want a big rescue, and the Nazi Party is the people that they think are going to rescue them. So I will see you guys in the next video. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you later.